Welcome. This is now the first session of the main stuff of the challenge support briefings, and we have Dave Jarman to give the talk. Dave Jarman is a senior lecturer at Bristol University in the Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and he is going to be our lead speaker for most of the briefing sessions. I'm also going to give one, and Terry's going to give one later on. But and I will also give some of the sessions with Dave. But he's here to start with, and he'll be taking us through that process that I talked about. I'll just remind people who are just out of the process. Let me just show you the screen that I'd had. So we've got the 5 weeks coming, and we're starting with exploring where do good ideas come from. So with that, I'll leave Dave to take us from here. Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you, Henry. Good morning, everybody. Absolute pleasure to meet you all. As Henry says, my name's Dave Jarman. I'll say a little bit more about what I do in just a moment. But let's crack on with the session. It's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind, a little bit of a blast of information, hopefully some inspiring and engaging stuff. By all means, start putting questions in the Q&A as we go. There might be some stuff that I pick up live during the presentation, but certainly we'll kind of get to any questions and queries at the end as soon as we can. Righty-ho. So, what we're going to do today. So we are going to make some introductions. We are going to talk about the sources of ideas, and there's lots of sources of ideas, from big problems and small frustrations to thinking about the future to trying to interpret trends and signals that we see. One particular idea that I'm going to introduce is the idea of using practice, the practice of something, as a lens through which we might think about doing something better. We're also going to restate the challenge, and in particular what your kind of challenge this week might be, and we're going to give you a little insight into what we're going to do in the next briefing as well. So who am I? Well, as I said, my name's Dave Jarman, and as Henry said, I'm a senior lecturer and I'm program director for the Masters in Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Bristol. I spent the last 15 years of my career helping students and graduates start up, and that is all kinds of shapes and sizes. So we're not just talking about tech startups and products and services. We're talking about events and charities and policy change and all kinds of things. My great passion is helping other people launch their ideas. I spent a chunk of my career in supporting enterprise, and I spent a chunk supporting careers at different universities. I've done a range of other things, and you can see some examples there. So how does innovation happen? Well, lots of us assume that actually you just kind of have an idea and then you just kind of polish it up and it's brilliant, right? No. Innovation is almost never a linear, smooth process. You find yourself going backwards as often as you go forward. You find yourself failing quite a lot. If you're trying to do something radical, you have to entertain the idea of failure. You're going to have to make a lot of guesses before you find something that actually works. You're going to follow a lot of dead ends before you find something that is genuinely desired and wanted. So I wouldn't come into this assuming that there's one right idea here. Actually, the trick is to make the right thing before you make the thing right. How do you find something that actually other people want and value? How do you prove that? How do you validate that? How do you evidence that? And that's going to be a real focus for us over the next 4 weeks. So we're going to try and make the right things before we make those things right, okay? So how do you find something of value that is actually worth doing? Well, there's a few approaches, and I'm going to talk you through a few. So innovation takes lots of different forms, and actually one of the things that we want to get over is it's not just about a new product or a new service. Those are the obvious ones. Actually, one of the ways in which we define innovation is that it's a new or improved way of doing something. So it might be a thing that already exists, but here's a new way to do it. You know, Amazon wasn't the first company to sell books online. They just did it better than anyone else. So actually lots of things, lots of innovations in our lives are things that we've had for years, but done in new and interesting ways. So if we're going to build back better in this new normal that we're in, what might that look like? How might we change the process? Similarly, sometimes the innovation is actually just articulating it in a new way to a new group of people. You know, if something sells in one part of the world, why won't it sell in another? One of my former students saw biodigester technology working in Bolivia and decided that actually this was perfect technology to use where he was then working in Uganda. So actually, whilst it wasn't innovative in Bolivia, it was innovative in Uganda when he moved it from one place to another. And sometimes you can create enormous value by just articulating something to a new audience. And finally, the innovation may in fact be entirely hidden from some of the users. The innovation might be that you've actually changed the process by which something gets done. And that's invisible to the end user, but it makes all the difference to the organization and the people within it. In that maybe it's easier or cheaper or more efficient or more effective or less wasteful. Actually, I suspect a lot of the innovations that we'd like to bring about are organizational ones. They're about getting things done in a better way. It's also worth saying that my definition of innovation is not necessarily the creative step. It's actually the creating something of value that gets adopted. So it's an idea that's been acted upon, and it's doing something better that achieves a better outcome. So we might measure our success in innovation by the rate at which it's adopted or the rate at which it makes impact. A bright idea that nobody takes up is no use to anyone. But a small change that makes a huge impact could be of enormous value. So as you're approaching this idea of building back better and doing something different, think about what that might mean. And it doesn't have to be big and grand and shiny. It has to make a difference. And actually a small change that is readily adopted could be hugely innovative. So where are these ideas going to come from? Well, I highly recommend the writer Stephen Johnson. He wrote an amazing book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And I've borrowed a whole bunch of ideas from there. And one of them, the best metaphors that he comes up with in that book is this idea that actually what innovators do is that they have a fantastic scrapyard of ideas. And actually what innovators do are piecing together spare parts. They're not sitting in isolation, dreaming new things up. They are standing on the shoulders of giants. They are standing on the work that has gone before them. They are taking the things that we already have and combining them and fitting them together in new and interesting ways. And that allows us to access what he refers to as the adjacent possible. So actually the trick to generating ideas is to have a really good scrapyard. So where are you gathering your spare parts from? Where are you assembling all the different and diverse pieces that you need to connect something that is likely to move you forward? And it's the richness and diversity of those connections that will allow you to find new ideas. So one way of doing this, you could start with a big problem. You could find something really big, like one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and you could go, right, how are we going to do something about life on land or climate action or zero hunger? How are we going to take this opportunity, this great disruptive moment post-pandemic, and do something different? The only issue is that those big problems can feel difficult to chew on. They're too big. They're too intimidating. You don't know where to start. So how do you bite off a single chunk? So the Patagonia company, something that I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. I've actually been spending the last few days reading the biography of Yvon Chouinard, the founder. Highly recommended. Let My People Go Surfing, it's called. Now, his interest was specifically mountaineering, and he wanted to build better mountaineering kit. And he started by building specifically climbing equipment and realized that actually old school climbing equipment, pitons that were hammered into the rock, were enormously damaging. So he developed ways of climbing, tools for climbing that actually made a huge difference. And that's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And Patagonia is now an enormous and hugely successful company, and it's founded all kinds of other things. So it still gives 10% of its kind of earnings to environmental causes every year. It founded the 1% for the Planet movement to get loads of other corporations to think about giving 1% of their profits to environmental activism every year. So you can start with something very niche in that area. So I'm just going to work with mountaineers doing mountaineering in a more environmental way, but it can scale up. But find something that you can start with. As a colleague of mine puts it, don't try and boil the ocean. Just find one pan full of water that you can boil at a time. But have that great goal, but start smaller. Equally, you could start with something very niche, some little itch, some little frustration that you bump into every day. And if you can find anyone else that actually also feels that rage, you might have something. Because if they'll pay you to share the burden, relieve it, mitigate it, or remove it, that could be quite interesting. Maybe there's something missing in the market that no one's doing. Or maybe there's a group who are being served by something, but not very well. One of the things that my entrepreneurship students often say is, I had a great idea for a product. And then I looked online and there's loads of people already doing it. And the first thing I say is, go and look at the customer reviews of the existing products. And inevitably, the students come back to me and say, all the reviews of that thing, everybody hates it. I could do a much better job. Brilliant. Actually, you've proved that there's a market for a thing, and actually that the people with the existing things aren't happy. So there's room to do better. Brilliant opportunity. They might even be overserved. They might even be getting more than they need. And actually, they would rather pay a little bit less for a more focused offering. So just think about whether, even if something already exists, you can do a more focused offering or a better offering. Because actually, if you've got something small, could you bring that to scale? Could you find a way to make that happen on a grander vision? This is something I actually only discovered in the last kind of 2 weeks, this little device, Timula. It was originally developed for freelancers who were trying to work out how to book their time against the contracts that they had. And they couldn't quite account for the time that they were spending in a meeting or doing the work or doing emails. So this little device on the tabletop has got a Bluetooth sensor, and you can mark your own choice of 8 different types of activity on the sides. And then as you kind of flip it over, it tells the program what you're spending your time doing. And on another display, you can have a picture of how you're. So it's a great little productivity tool as well. But it's just a neat little insight. But this could be a big thing because they found a way to make that scalable to lots of different people in lots of different places. A third way of sourcing ideas is to anticipate what's coming next. So the adjacent possible, as Johnson put it. So whether you think the future is going to be kind of gloriously kind of summary utopia, or whether it's going to be bleak and dystopian, if you can anticipate what's going to be coming in the future, you might think about actually what do we need to change today to make that future better? How do we spot opportunities that no one else has spotted yet and anticipate those and build something in readiness? One way of doing this is to look at what we call megatrends. So lots and lots of companies, lots and lots of governments are publishing papers about megatrends. There's a couple of good ones mentioned at the bottom of that slide, one from PwC and one from Citra. And these are these kind of big trends that are affecting everybody. So PwC's included things like rapid urbanization, climate change and resource scarcity, shifts in global economic power, demographic and social change, in particular kind of an aging society, and technological breakthroughs. But there are others. Citra produces an annual megatrends report, well worth a look. And to be honest, even if you think you know what it is that you want to work on, go and look at that thing through the lens of those megatrends. Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? How is that going to shape out over the next 10, 20 years? And that can give you some great new ideas to work on. However, you could also look at what we call signals, or even weak signals. Now, these are little things that you might have noticed that are not yet a trend. They're not big enough. They're not true enough in enough places to be a trend, but they might be the first sign of that trend. And this is where you might look for things. You go, okay, is that what the future looks like? And these are slightly more high risk bets, as it were. But obviously, if you can anticipate them, you're ahead of the market. You're ahead of the change. So keeping your eye out for these spare parts, keeping an eye out for these things might help you build something really interesting, really new, really novel. One way of thinking about some of these signals and trends and anticipating them is a process that we call Steeple. Now, some of you might have heard of what we call a pestle analysis, and that stands for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. And these are all themes, and you might, and then the extra E that creates the Steeple is this idea of the ethics of it. So for any given trend, any given idea, any given product, any given service, what are the political dimensions and how's that changing? What are the economic dimensions? What are the social dimensions? Think these through. And this might feel like it's just a sort of brain dumping exercise. But again, it's about finding spare parts that you can then combine and work with in really interesting ways. So all of these processes are what I might call kind of divergent thinking. How do you not just start from one place and follow a linear path? Because the linear path is the obvious path. It's the thing that everybody else has done as well. If you want to find something new, you want to find something innovative and disruptive, actually, you have to think silly and you have to think divergently. You have to consider things that other people haven't considered. And the pestle and steeple analysis process is a great way of just broadening your thinking. Another tool for doing that process is what we call scanning. And the diagram on the screen in front of you includes kind of participatory methods, so methods that involve interacting with other people, and non-participatory methods, so desk research, effectively. Some of them are very manual methods, like going and asking and doing, and some of them are kind of semi-automated, so looking things up on Google Trends or setting Google alerts to find different things. So when you're doing your research, do think about using a range of methods, because the danger of using only one type means that your view is quite limited. That Google Trends only tells you certain things. You might get a far more interesting perspective by going and asking real humans what they say about things. Or if you've been talking to real people, then go and maybe validate some of those assumptions by going and looking at some data, looking at some quantitative data. So some other sources and new ideas, and these are brilliant to go and have a look at. So one of them, Springwise, actually the chief exec here is a University of Bristol alumnus that I've been doing some work with, James Bidwell. Springwise is an amazing source that goes and looks for innovative ideas being developed around the world. And you can get almost daily trends on stuff that's being spotted around the world. Trend Hunter is a great way of looking at what people are talking about, what people are buying, what the future in any given kind of consumer category might look like. Again, just inspiration, really, spare parts. If you're wondering what the future might look like, and you're interested in some of these kind of trends that I've been talking about, a couple of references that you might find useful. One of them is from the global consultancy Accenture, and it talks about the never normal. So the trends that are likely to define the post-pandemic period. Another great paper by the RSA about what does the future of work look like, and they imagine 4 different possible futures for what work looks like. And again, they might all be great contexts for you to have a think about your ideas in, or to get some inspiration about what might need to change or what might need to be done better. So my kind of final piece of content is around this idea of practice. So in this context, a practice is either an entity, something that we can talk about. So maybe like we can talk about dancing, or we can talk about cooking, or it's something that we can do, like we cook meals or we go dancing. So it can be either a noun or a verb. So examples of practices might include the practice of teaching, which has changed radically in lockdown. All of this happens online these days. The practice of swimming, the practice of putting your makeup on, or doing cycling, or getting married, or recycling, or running a particular type of business. And we all know that these practices are different in different bits of the world. They're different between different people. We make these things happen in different ways. So there are these practices of doing things. And I think this is a really interesting lens when you're thinking about building back better, and what does post-pandemic life look like? How have practices changed? What's different and what will be different in the future? Now, there are three elements to a practice. One is the kind of the material and non-material elements, so the objects and tools and the kind of components that are used to fulfill that practice. It's also about the knowledge and the competencies, like the knowledge of what to do and how to do it, and your competency in doing it, like the skills to do it. And then finally, practices carry meanings. So, what's important about the way that this is done is, cleanliness, the most important thing, is kind of profit, the most important thing, are values the most important thing. What are the expectations of how a practice should be performed? Just before I read the Patagonia founders biography, I was reading Steve Jobs' biography. There are some similarities, but there's some real differences as well about how they think business should be done. Well worth exploring. So I've given you a whole bunch of stuff to think about. We've talked about solving big problems. We've talked about daily frustrations. We've talked about the future. We've talked about practice lenses. Hopefully within that, you've got a load of spare parts, a load of inspiration to go and think about. So your week one challenge, of which this session is a part, is do your research. Go and have a look around. Find some problems. Find some opportunities. Find some gaps in the market. Find some things that could be done better. Identify stakeholder needs. So these are your users, and try and empathize with them to gain some insight. Now, the first bit of this is what we've been covering today. Go and do your research, scan the environment, think about the future. What we're going to be doing on Thursday is we're going to be talking about some tools and methods for how we ensure we're creating value for other people. So we're going to be generating these ideas, but we're also going to be looking at what do users want? What do people need? What do they actually value? So I'm going to stop presenting there, and we're going to take the opportunity for some questions and answers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dave. Can I just add a couple of things before we go out to the people? One is just an example. You had a lot of examples of businesses. I think, other examples, for instance, people might look at is something like Extinction Rebellion, which, a year or so ago didn't exist. And I remember actually a friend of mine held a talk and invited an Extinction Rebellion, one of the main spokespeople. I think this was July last year. And it was like we had never heard of them. And he was totally blown away by this guy. And a year later, Extinction Rebellion has hundreds of thousands of followers, branches all around the world, etc., etc. And it's interesting there, I suppose, innovation was to really have this distributed organizational form and to be willing to face up to the negativities of, the real crisis of climate change as an emergency. And previously, environmental NGOs had tried to always put a positive spin on it. I want to tell you the bad news. There's opportunities, there's possibilities, the business case for climate change. And really, this tapped into the deep concerns and worries of particularly young people. And so it got a huge following. And so that's another model. The other thing I wanted to throw out is another resource. All of you will have received a free subscription to the Mint magazine. That is full of ideas about different ways of thinking about the economy, organizing the economy, and so on. And there's actually a link on the bottom right. I think this is there to the Mint magazine, so you can go there, and there's a search function on the Mint magazine for different topics that you're interested in, and you can search all about 1,000 articles to search on different topics, and also lots of news items in there as well, to pick up ideas and thoughts about what's going on where. Okay, thank you. Just thought I'd add.
And just to build on those points, I think a really key thing to think about here is this idea of borrowing. Like, lots of innovation is about an idea being lifted out of one field and used in another. So, more militant forms of activism kind of pivoted to kind of different places. You know, the idea that a kind of a particular process or technique or idea works in one environment, and then you move it to another to create innovative value. That these are not kind of just plucked out of the air. These aren't just sort of imagined. It's a process of sort of bricolage. It's a process of borrowing. It's this scrapyard that Johnson refers to as. So, you know, actually, one of the best ways to innovate is simply to look around and gather up what you can and go, if I borrowed this idea from here that no one's done before, how would that work over here? Oh, okay, that's interesting. And it allows us to move forward. So be a magpie, borrow. I mean, great artists steal, as they say.
And Extinction Rebellion actually explicitly based their whole strategy on the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and so on. And though there is quite a debate whether it will work, because obviously it's very different for protesting against a set of rules or whatever that stop doing things, as opposed to changing everything that we do.
That's the process of exploring, of trying things out. You might find dead ends, but inevitably something else will emerge out of Extinction Rebellion if that doesn't work. New strategies will appear, new forms of environmental activism will occur out of that. But equally, Extinction Rebellion didn't come from nowhere. It's building on it's standing on the shoulders of giants. It's taking the work of the likes of kind of Greenpeace and similar, and the civil rights movement, and then stepping on again. So it's another step forward. It's another change moving forward.
So have we got any questions? Do put questions in the box, and other people can vote on them, and we'll take the most popular questions. Well, we'll take any question at the moment. And also, actually, if you ask the first question, you can come on the onto the stage and ask it here, and we can have a sort of discussion. So do ask a question. Sorry?
Just as an aside, whilst people are thinking of questions, where are the resources for this session?
We will put all the resources on a page on the main festival website. The page has yet to be created, and obviously, Dave, you can put all the links there, and we'll have a sort of organisation. All the recordings of the sessions we'll put on YouTube and then link as well into the same page. So we'll have a sort of regular growing set of resources, which will all be on the festival site for people to access.
Thank you. We'll
let people know where they are. We'll be doing a newsletter at the end of this week, sort of beginning of next week, and we can put a link in there to where they all are. And so people will be able to sort of review the past week before they start on the next week. So any thoughts? It can be a bit overwhelming. And I think the thing is, we will have obviously next a session for people to talk about it on their virtual tables and begin to sort of get their minds around it. And obviously at that point, people can still ask questions and challenge them. Out of interest, Dave, what do you think? I mean, if you took all the innovations, actually not the commercial area, but the sort of social area, what innovations would strike you in the social policy, whatever? What struck you in that sort of space?
Good question. I'm trying to think of a recent example that actually really jumped out at me. I'm trying to think.
Because actually, if you think XR was such a game changer, wasn't it? It totally shook up the whole environmental movement. And it's difficult to think of, I mean, an innovation on that scale, certainly in the environmental movement. I wonder in the sort of social and movement, obviously, Black Lives Matter has suddenly gone to a whole extra level, though I'm not sure that was a sort of instantaneous, a sort of response.
No, that felt like a that felt, and that's the thing with a lot of these movements, that actually a lot of this stuff has a habit of happening at a local level, at quite a small level, because because of the nature of sort of social and civic change, not necessarily having the kind of resource that kind of a corporate activity might. There's a great diagram that I sometimes refer to of all projects. It's like a triangle. They can either be good, cheap, or fast, but you're only ever allowed two of good, cheap, and fast. So if it's good and it's cheap, it's going to be slow. And if it's good and fast, that means it will be expensive. And then if it's cheap and it's fast, it's likely to be bad. And as a result, I think a lot of the sort of social change stuff has a habit of happening at a very local level. That it's individual groups, it's individual communities. And I think the whole Black Lives Matter thing was actually, it kind of galvanized a lot of small movements, a lot of underlying thought and activity and community and groups, and it spurred them into action. Yeah. It seemed to sort of take it over a tipping point. It seemed to connect them up. It seemed to unleash enough rage for all of those to cross that threshold. But it's one of those things about when we're trying to make a difference, it's how you enable the resources to make that happen. And that's why I think I work with a lot of students who want to do a lot of good in the world, and they often feel a little bit intimidated because the scale of the problem is so big. And actually the advice I always give is, okay, try and do something where you are. What resources, what networks, what can you do from where you are? Because that will make a small difference. And actually, if you can prove that a process works, you could potentially grow it and scale it. But inevitably, it's specific from community to community.
We've got a question.
Yeah, no, I can see. So yeah, absolutely. In some ways, to paraphrase the credit card advert, ideas are cheap, execution is priceless. We all have lots of ideas. Making them happen effectively with impact is a much tougher bit, and that we will kind of get closer to that as the weeks go on through this program. But starting with a clear idea in mind and being willing to be agile about that, about how it evolves, does make execution a little bit easier. But stay true to those principles. Yeah, there's red tape. One of the things that we're going to talk about in week 3 is the mantra adopted by the RSA. And they talk about this idea of think like a system, act like an entrepreneur. And one of the ways that they think about that is using systems thinking, using this idea that everything operates in a system. If you can map that out, you can work out where to interact, where you can make the most difference, where the best intervention is likely to be, and then act like an entrepreneur and go and head straight towards it. And rather than sort of planning, go, right, well, if the big threshold to this is bureaucracy at a particular place, let's go and find out how to tackle the bureaucracy. Let's go and work out what the shortcut is. Like, is there someone that I can talk to? Is there a way of saying, I want to make this kind of change? What's the best way to do that? Who's done it before? Where has it worked? Where can I find an example that allows me to model what I might do, to shortcut? Now, and shortcuts can feel like cheating, but actually it's about efficiency. And if we can collectively go, right, the problem is that little bit of red tape. Okay, right, let's focus our attention on that. Let's not waste time doing all these other things that we could be doing and then getting annoyed with ourselves because the red tape is still preventing us. How do you go straight for the red tape and get that out of the way to allow you to do the rest?
Can I might add to the red tape question, because I work as a civil servant part-time with the UK government, and I think this term red tape is a very unfortunate one, because it makes everything into some other ununderstandable sort of system that you can't relate to. I think it is like any other system. It has rules, it works in certain ways. Now, it is true that there is a tendency for large organizations, large commercial organizations, to actually benefit from red tape. It's actually a competitive advantage to them because they have the resources to manage it. And so there is a problem with a sort of coalition between the sort of incumbents and government who have almost jointly created all the rules. It's actually not just government that creates it, it's businesses that create it with them. And those rules are often beneficial to the incumbent. So as a new innovator wanting to do something very different from what the main incumbents do, which of course you would want to do, or why would you do it, then you can find that you just don't fit into the sort of system that's been set up, because it wasn't designed for you, it was designed for the existing incumbents. But you really need to understand that, and you need the expertise and to find people who can help you work out how the current systems or rules work, what is easy to change, what is difficult to change, because rules can be either primary, i.e. sort of legislation that's passed by Parliament, or they can be secondary or tertiary or guidelines, or the detail is relatively easy to change. And also, I mean, in terms of examples of people addressing that and trying to do something, the Financial Compliance Authority in the UK, I think it's called that, they now have what they call a sand pit to experiment and try when you work with new innovators to sort of test the rules and whether the rules could be changed to allow them to get through. This is with fintech, basically. So don't give up. It can be challenging, but don't put your head in the sand, but also don't give up either. You must build this into your thinking.
Can I offer an additional perspective there? So actually, this was a book that I was considering recommending as part of this talk, but I'm going to read a tiny section from it. So it's unfortunately it's in the sunlight, but Do Disrupt by David Hyatt. And on one page it says the competition have more of everything than you. And this is a way of thinking about some of that red tape and inertia. They've got more staff, more history, more distribution, more patents, more sales, more infrastructure, more context, more marketing, more money, more followers. They spend more on R&D than you turn over as a company. Who would be crazy enough to take on this Goliath? But they also have more meetings, more committees, more red tape, more politics, more internal fighting, more rules, more regulation, more ideas being killed by research than you do, more outdated business models, more demotivated staff, more people wondering, what is this company all about than you do? And then they have a legal department, which is the graveyard of humor. And they don't care about innovation and pioneering anymore. They care about staples and photocopier paper. So actually, the fact that you don't have some of those things makes you agile, gives you opportunities, allows you to think differently. You may yet require a hack to get the system to respond to you in a positive way, but think about what is also on your side and how you might be more agile than the things that you're taking on.
And also, just linking to that, behind the rules and regulations and everything are politicians, and who often have public purpose at the heart of what they're doing. So if you're a new organization that have a clear public purpose, you will probably find it easier to also create alliances with civil servants, with government, with MPs, people to support you, to help you on your way. Whereas, if you're the incumbents who are just seen as purely there to make money, won't get that sort of attention. So find alliances with people in the political system who are in tune with your purposes, your social purposes, and that will really help you as well to address those.
It's just worth saying some of these things we will pick up again in week 4. So one of the sessions in week 4 is about kind of overcoming the barriers for your idea as we start to think about how you kind of pitch and articulate your idea. And one that I'll just mention very quickly here is this idea of starting with why. That if you can articulate a purpose for what you're trying to do, that is often a far better way of engaging people than articulating the what of what it is you're proposing to do. Because people can get on board with a purpose. They can't always get on board with a thing. So because they can share that purpose with you, they don't necessarily share that thing because you might own that thing. So just think about whether you can articulate that purpose.
And I think if you get too specific too quickly about the what, you put people off as well. If you get them on board with the why, and the what is, to be determined, then you can jointly do it so it works for everyone. But let's take the next question. Do you think that living wage and a 4-day working week are likely to become a reality for many people post-COVID?
That's a fun one. The first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to decouple those two pieces.
Yeah.
Because they might come together, but equally, it might be more difficult to get them both through together than to get them through separately. So that idea of a living wage. Now, both of these ideas have been talked about a lot, kind of in the pandemic, post-pandemic. So they're definitely more viable, more in discussion than they have been at any point in the recent past. I think it really is going to massively depend on the appetite of government and the problems it's trying to solve. So this is that bit that we're going to talk about a little bit more on Thursday, about really understanding your users. That because we might think it's a good idea is one thing, but it's got to solve a problem for all the stakeholders concerned. So just because we think it might be good for the population, good for a population, is not enough. A government has also got to realise it solves the problems that they think they're facing as well. So as a non-economist, I'm going to stop talking there because I'm going to embarrass myself and let Henry talk about that one.
Well, I think, it's who knows? We are facing a huge economic recession, almost certainly, going forward. And how will governments respond to that? I mean, one way actually is to move to a 4-day working week because you share work out more evenly. And actually, a living wage, the people who spend most of their money are the poorest. So actually, if you increase the wages of the poorest, you get more money circulating around your economy. So both of those are very sensible things to do in recessions. Are governments sensible? Discuss.
It's a whole other festival, isn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, there's lots more other pressure on them, and it depends on their political persuasion and all sorts of things. But from a purely economic perspective, increasing living wage is good for the overall economy, even if some businesses find it challenging. Overall, it will shift resources to the most poor who spend most and need most, and sharing work out more even again has the same sort of effect.
Thinking about that through a practice lens, just as an example, what's interesting here is that we've almost certainly gotten closer to having the technology to enable systems like that. We've almost certainly been writing, developing and thinking about ideas far more in the last year or so than we have previously. So actually the know-how for delivering that kind of system has probably emerged. The key one now is meanings and norms. At the moment, we've still got this attachment that, actually we have to work to earn money to live. Now, I think once we can start deconstructing that particular piece of meaning, some of these things become more viable. But that relates to the kind of political ideology that Henry mentioned. But just as an example of this idea of thinking through a practice lens, are all of the pieces kind of shifting in a way that feels positive? And I think they are for that particular argument. However, we've also been asked a question about the most important, or the first question we need to ask. This is the
last question we can take, because I think we have to have a break before the next session.
So I would suggest that the question you ought to be thinking and keeping in your heads is, does this surprise me? If you're looking for something new and interesting, you need to find something that surprises you. So when you're doing your research and you're gathering your insights, look out for things that surprise you. Because if they surprise you, they will probably surprise other people. And the more surprising they are, the less likely they are to have been done and to have been tried. So as you go out and you try and find big problems that interest you, or small frustrations you might act on, or you think about what does the future look like for this specific piece, look for things that surprise you, because that, I guarantee, will be rich territory to explore for doing something new.
That's a very interesting angle. I suppose what do you care about also? Because I mean, if you're going to take this forward, you've got to sort of care about it at some level. I think things that matter to you are going to be crucial.
That would always be my second question, my sort of evaluation question. It's like, I found something surprising. Do I care enough to do anything about it?
It might be just, God, that's weird, but who gives a what's it? But it could be, gosh, why does that happen? That just seems altogether wrong or altogether right or something. So your relationship to it is, I think, must be key. And of course, not just you, because we'll be working together with other people. And if you find a few other people in your group are saying, yeah, God, that's, and you see gelling with other people on an idea or an issue or something, then that must mean something, because if it's just you who are thinking it, then you may just be mad. But but if you test it with a few other people or they come back and everyone goes, wow, yeah, okay, then, it's a good way of seeing you're probably on the right tracks.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that whole kind of testing, prototyping, and sharing process in week 3. But one of the things that we will be picking up next week when we talk more about ideas is both how do you kind of generate some of those insights, how do you generate your ideas from the insights that you've had, but also how do you evaluate your ideas? And that idea of personal interest is a really, really valid criteria for deciding which ideas to take forward.
Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you very much, Dave. That's been a fantastic first session. And as we say, it's been recorded. It'll be up. So we will make sure everyone gets access to it. Now, could I ask you all to leave the harbour and then come back at 10 o'clock, because I'll have updated it so you'll be able to see the link to the workshop and I'll test that and make sure, because I think you have to hard refresh to get to see it because I've changed the settings. But you won't see it if you just stay in it. So do leave, and I'm going to take the presentation off and then update things, and we'll meet again in the harbour. Well, come through to the harbour, then go to the workshop, and I'll make sure everyone's found their way to the workshop, and then we'll start there. And we'll give you instructions as to how the workshop session is going to work in the workshop. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Bye for the moment.
Thank you.